Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Tina, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Mary.
I know we're going to have a wonderful conversation today. But before we find out about what you're doing right now, I want to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Oh, wow. Okay, the first job I had as a young person, I worked a summer leadership program in Washington, D.C. actually under Mayor Marion Barry. And it was a great program. It was 2 months over a summer. I got to meet some great people, some great kids, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of leadership development, some emotional intelligence, and some arts. It's pretty cool.
What a great first job.
Yeah,
So,
it was great. Yeah.
what were you doing? Were you leading workshops, leading others? What was it?
No, it was a summer leadership program. So it was a lot of work, attending a lot of workshops,
Okay.
doing a lot of writing, doing presentations, after the workshops, lessons learned, key takeaways, that kind of stuff.
Wow, I can only imagine if we all started off that way,
Right.
of really, learning how to be professional and
hmm
learning all these really important skills. So, where did you go after that? What was another almost pre-professional job?
Yeah, so I had a job with a conservative talk radio network called Radio America in Washington, D.C., and I was a front office manager, yeah, a receptionist. Um, and that was an interesting job. It was an administrative job. I wasn't really familiar with talk radio at all. But it was a pretty decent job. I was fairly happy in it. But there were some things that I didn't quite understand. I was very young. I was 19 years old when I had taken on that role. Um, but it was a decent position
When
to
you
start.
That's an interesting way to talk about it. What It sounded like you liked it. And what did you like the atmosphere? People were nice to you. It seemed to run smoothly. What when you think back at it, when you say decent, what does that kind of mean to you as a young person?
I mean, as a young person, it was decent to one, have a job, and two, have a paying job, right? And the pay was fairly low.
Mhm.
It was technically a first real professional job. It was decent in that I had my own space. I was in the front office, kind of away from everyone else.
Mm.
And so I could focus and I could get my actual job done pretty effectively and efficiently because there were not many interruptions. The downside of that was being so disconnected from everyone else
Mhm.
and never really feeling like a part of the team because you are the front office, you are technically the lowest person on the totem pole, and not many opportunities for connection or conversation when you're isolated in that way.
Mhm. That's such an interesting combination because when you were first talking, I thought, yeah, absolutely. People need a space to get their work done,
hmm
especially that front office. I mean, you're doing so many different things at one. People can walk in, there could be a call, another call, somebody comes out and asks you to do something. And so to have a space to get your work done is really important. But as important, not either or, but both equally important is being a part of the team, this sense of
hmm
belonging, the being
hmm
included. They're not going to hear your voice and what's working and not working if you are out there and
hmm
disconnected. Yeah,
hmm
really an ode to getting space right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, tell us about college. What did you major in?
So I just majored in management in general. I didn't go to college until later in my career. I went straight from high school directly into working full-time jobs. Initially, I wanted to be a hairstylist and do like personal branding and
Mhm.
styling. And I did go to cosmetology school at the time. I went to cosmetology school at night, and then I had my professional jobs during the day. And then I made a pivot because one of the roles that I had, someone took an interest in me. I was in a role with a lobbying firm, a law firm lobbying firm combo, where an individual just took interest in me. They liked my work ethic. They liked, um, my production, how I was getting things done. They liked the look and the professionalism I put into my written work and my design. And he wasn't the only one. I ended up working with seven partners.
Mm.
So that was a blessing and a curse because how do you put seven people on one person?
Right.
But I must have been that good that I pulled it off. And so yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it is so interesting that these things come our way in life and it can just really
Mm-hmm.
just turn the trajectory. And
Mm-hmm.
I have heard this story over and over again by somebody saw another
Mm-hmm.
person and invested in them, or even
Mm-hmm.
said encouraging words such as, I see this potential in you, or have you
Mm-hmm.
thought about?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that had been something else had been ruminating back there, but that kind of confirmation that somebody
Mm-hmm.
else there sees it and maybe I will try something new. So then you
Yeah.
pivoted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that pivot occurred with that one individual who noticed me and took that interest in me. He told me that he was going to go work in Congress or work in the Senate, because the congressman that he had worked for previously, was running for Senate and would most likely win. And he said, I think you would be great for him because you tell the truth, and politicians need people that will tell them the truth.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, well, okay. And honestly had no interest in it. I knew that working on Capitol Hill was going to be a lot of work. I knew that people worked really long hours because when you're a lobbying firm, you're on the other side of that. You're calling to get to the representative to try to get meetings for your clients. And so, I'm on the other side of it. And so it was not something I wanted to do at all. And then he invited me, my colleague invited me to a reception to meet this potential senator, and he seemed okay, very good looking, but he seemed okay. And my immediate thought was, oh, he's good looking. He's one of those guys that's going to be in the mirror all the damn time. I don't have time for this. And then I went to another reception and met him again, and talked to him for a little bit. I wasn't, I was just neutral. And then it came up a third time, and my colleague kept asking me, are you going to take this job? Are you going to take this job? I was like, well, it hasn't actually been offered. I don't really know what this job is. I need certainty. I'm a very detailed person. I just need to know what the job is and if I'm actually being offered the job. Well, I ended up meeting with the chief of staff, and it was the weirdest interview. And I realize as an adult, as I'm older now, that when you have an in, when you have a connection, and someone can get you in, those kinds of interviews are going to be unconventional. They're going to be different. Sometimes it's at a coffee shop, maybe it's a dinner, maybe it's over drinks. Well, this one, I actually had to go to the person's house, to the member's house. And I'm talking with the chief of staff, and the interview started in the Senate office and then went to the member's house. And I was like, this is odd. I'm a little uncomfortable. I'm saying to myself, I'm a little uncomfortable. But it was just a quick conversation. Tell me about your work ethic. And I think I may have said something like, well, I like to focus, get my work done, and go home and come back and do it all over again for the good of the people. I believe that's what I said. Um, and we shook hands, and the chief of staff gave me a ride to the metro, and she asked me how much I was looking for. I told him, and we shook hands, and he said he'd be in touch. I got out and got on the metro. It was so weird. And then I got the job. I took the job, and I had been in the Senate for 10 years, same member for 10 years.
Mm. I'm trying to think of what I want to ask you about that experience. So,
Hmm.
conflict is normal. We have it
Hmm.
everywhere. People are at all different levels of dealing with it or not dealing with it.
Hmm.
So, so when you think about that experience, those 10 years, um, can you tell us about a time? Let's go in a different way. Tell us about a time that there was a conflict, but it was really handled well.
Mm, mm. Oh, I have a perfect one. So this chief of staff told me I was a problem. And I didn't quite understand it because I was getting my work done. I was coming in early. I was working late. I was getting work done. And he said, he and the senator, they pulled me into the senator's office and he said, Tina, everyone loves you, but they are afraid of you.
Mm,
And so I'm maybe 25, 26 at the time. And I said, well, tell me more. What does that mean? How can people love you, but be afraid of you? And he said, people are afraid of you. Your disposition, like the way you present yourself, can be off-putting.
mm,
And I believe my response was, well, how is that my problem? Because I'm like, I'm a nice person. What do you mean? And they're like, Tina, you have to understand that the way you present yourself might either be too powerful, or the people that we have on staff are just very young and very inexperienced. So when you speak, like you have so much confidence, and they were not telling me to not do those things,
mhm,
but because I was so matter of fact, it came off as curt and cold and not very warm and welcoming, which was in direct conflict with the kind of personality the senator had. He was very nice, warm, accommodating. And in so many words, that's what they were asking. They were asking me to figure it out.
mhm,
The chief of staff said, I have something for her. He moved my desk back. So my office is next to the senator's. He moved my desk back and he put two chairs in front of my desk. He said, if anyone comes to me with a problem, I'm sending them to you first. So I had a little attitude. I was like, I don't know what this means.
mhm,
But yeah, I will continue to do my job as effectively as I can. If I can be helpful, I'm always open to be helpful. He said, you don't have a choice but to be helpful because I'm sending everyone to you. Okay. Well, I didn't realize at the time that that was training for me.
mhm,
He was putting me in a position to become more influential, to be a real part of the senator's operation, because the senator really focused on the importance of building strong relationships. And the way to do that is to relate to people. Well, at the time, I went over I didn't know, 25, 26 years old. I didn't want to hang out after work.
mhm,
I just wanted to go home. And then I started liking people. I mean, people were coming to, I didn't have a choice. So there was so much foot traffic in my office. I was the person that was filtering things over and up to both the chief of staff and the senator. And so him doing that put me in a position where, I'm literally solving problems. People are coming to me all day, every day, asking me for advice, support. And over time, I started to like people. I actually liked solving problems. I was actually good at it. And honestly, had he not done that, I don't know that I would be in the career I'm in right now. I
mhm.
attribute a lot of my development and what I've done in my career to my first chief of staff, for sure.
That is such a great story. I love it. I love the idea because it happens to people. They're pulled into an office and they're told, "You're the problem." They say, "What do you mean? I'm a good worker." And other people find you unapproachable. And then your response, How is that my problem? I mean, I see that all over.
Mm-hmm.
I also understand that response. How am I responsible for other people's perceptions, their emotional responses? And yet, as a part of being a professional, we have in a communication, we have
Mm-hmm.
to figure it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do
Mm-hmm.
I in this culture get along, be my authentic self, but understand this structure, understand the climate, and acclimatize instead of assuming that everybody needs to um, be with my style, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
love that story. I love that they spoke into you, that they gave you a mission, that
Mm-hmm.
but that you took it. I mean, that says
Mm-hmm.
so much. Like, why did you not just quit and say, well, I'll do this someplace else where I'm appreciated?
Mm-hmm.
Why did
Mm-hmm.
you stay with it?
Well, I stayed with it because people only have those conversations with you if they truly care.
Yeah.
If they didn't care, I could have continued down whatever path I was on, and I could have gotten fired if it were that big a deal. If they had had multiple conversations with me, I could have been on the chopping block. But the fact that they pulled me aside and gave me an opportunity, not only to course correct, but to provide real life training in the process, that's lived experience. You can't get that anywhere else. No training program is going to teach you that relating to people in real time and watching reactions, watching responses, and knowing developing emotional intelligence through that process. You can't get that attending a seminar or a workshop.
Mhm. I 100% agree, right? A lot of times we
Hmm.
want those skills, but then we don't want to do the hard work. It's like,
Right.
I want to be a pianist or a violinist or a marathon runner, but I don't want to run or I don't want to practice, right?
Hmm.
You get these skills and by doing them
Hmm.
over and over. And as you said, watching and learning and developing.
Hmm.
But I think it is really interesting that you took it that way and you saw it
Hmm.
as an opportunity and then you took the opportunity and you learned from it. I think I
Hmm.
mean, that really is wise that if somebody wants you gone, they won't have that hard conversation because it must have been hard for them to have that conversation.
Yeah, and the other part of that is you don't want a US senator to think negatively of you.
Mm,
Um, you just don't. That's just not a good thing. It's just not a good thing at all. The other part of that is I really liked them.
mm,
They were great examples of what good leadership should be.
mm,
They were very open and honest with the staff. They gave the staff opportunities to learn more, to contribute more. And if someone was not doing well or they misjudged and hired someone in the wrong position, they would reposition them. They would put them in another role. They would not necessarily let people go. They would redirect people into a role where their strengths could be realized.
mm.
I thought that's a different take,
Yeah.
than just letting someone go. Now, I'm sure that I recall there were times where you absolutely have to do that. But for the most part, we redirected people all the time into the appropriate roles,
Mm.
whether it was internally in the organization or elsewhere.
What a wonderful environment. It really sounds like it's people-centric. And as we know, that when you
Mm-hmm.
treat your people well, then they're going to be more empowered and do better work. I
Mm-hmm.
also, maybe you could talk a little bit more on this theme of, because I know a lot of people are in this boat. I'm at work to work, and then I'm going to go home with my family and friends. That's not what work is for. And there's
Mm-hmm.
this whole loneliness epidemic that people talk about and loneliness at work. And so it's almost like people think, I've there this divide of if, I'm not here to get friends at work, so I'm going to be disconnected and so I'm going to get all my friends and family that's separate instead of this idea of what it means to be a really good colleague and really good working relationships that actually makes your work better and more fulfilling when you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
raise your head up and see the people around you. Can you talk
Mm-hmm.
about that development and your own thoughts about working?
I tell you this, had I not taken at that time my boss's advice and taken on those additional responsibilities to learn how to build relationships, I would not have gotten further in my career. Those are the relationships that help you in the future.
Mhm.
You may not recognize it when you're in the moment and you're in your job and you're in those positions. And I'm not saying you have to be best friends, but camaraderie with colleagues is not a bad thing. And I understand some of us are private people. I was a very private person at the time. But you can have community around the work. Even if it's a bad working environment, you can have community around the work in the organization.
Mhm.
When you go to happy hour, maybe you're complaining about the job, right? So community, it's important to have some sort of community in your organization with maybe it's just one person, maybe it's a couple of people, maybe it's a small circle, I don't know, maybe it's a big circle. But I do think that that's important, not only for your own development, but it's also good for potential future opportunities. Because you have no idea, you leave and go to another organization, what if no one will reference you? What if it's a bad situation? Your boss won't even reference you, HR won't reference you, but maybe that one colleague that you built community with, that person could be your saving grace,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and I didn't realize that at the time, before I had my stern talking to. But I realized after that, like, well, this is it's actually pretty great.
Yeah.
And for other people to know how great you are. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no negative for letting other people know or experience your greatness.
Mhm.
If
Yeah.
people could reframe it that way,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
I think
love
that's
that.
important.
I think that is important. There is this sort of shyness about tooting your own horn, but when you're working with a bunch of professionals, you get to see their greatness and benefit. And when you're
Absolutely.
working on a project, you're like, oh, yeah, this person, Anita, she worked on this. And I know this because of this conversation. And now I can bring her in and my
Mm-hmm.
work is going to increase. And so is hers, right? Because we know
Mm-hmm.
status, builds by sharing. Sharing
Right.
power breeds more power, right?
Right. Right.
And when we tell people don't burn bridges, but we don't think a lot about all the bridges we ought to build, right?
Right.
And our networks and how, networks are not usury in a negative sense, but we help each other. It's a helping of each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Tina, tell us where you are now and what you're up to.
So I'm actually based in Washington, D.C. I've worked in politics for well over 20 years now. And I have a firm, Jackson Consulting Group, where we do executive coaching and organizational management consulting. And we've been doing that since 2017. Yeah.
S- So what made you decide to start this endeavor?
hmm So I was at a political committee for about 8 years. And, I think something happens with us after 40. Sometimes the likelihood of your boss being a lot younger than you is high as you get
Mhm.
older. And I had to ask myself, if I have 28 years of experience and my boss is 28 or 30, what am I doing? Like, is something wrong? I'm just saying, just particularly in politics, the likelihood of your boss being younger, it might be high. And I realized that one of the highest levels of value in a lot of organizations is communication. If you can, if you can strategize and you can communicate well, communicate messaging very well, those are highly valued. And I had to think to myself, am I not doing enough strategizing? Am I not speaking up in meetings enough? And I was on C level. I had a C level role. And I said, is there something, what am I not doing? And I said to myself, you know what I'm not doing? I'm not advocating enough for myself. Question is, did I want to advocate for myself? What else was there to advocate? I was already in a senior level role. I was already in a C level role. I was already making well over $300,000. What else is there to advocate for?
Right.
What do I want? Like what do I want? I had to think to myself, what do you want? And I remember saying years and years ago, I'm really good at this management stuff. I should do management consulting. Well, I started Jackson Consulting Group and I started taking on clients, part time. And then I decided, I think there's something to this. Not only that, I think there's something to figuring out how to bridge the gap between effective leadership and impactful leadership and the employee experience and the
Mhm.
employee motivation and retention. And I said, I'm going to figure out how to close this gap, but I can't do it here. So I'm going to step into my business full time. And I did. I did. I stepped into the business full time. And I was very lucky when I did that. I landed about 4 or 5 clients at the time that kept me fairly busy. And it's been rolling ever since. I offer coaching and advisory services primarily to CEOs in the trade association, nonprofit, and corporate space. But I also continue to dabble in the political environment as well, when they listen, when they're willing, when they're open and willing to listen. But yeah, it's been a great ride for sure. And I wrote a book in that process as well. Also trying to, do everything I can to close that gap, as difficult as it is.
The book is called The Power Play Journal. And so, what is that
Yes.
about?
So I've added talk about 32 battle tested strategies for impactful leadership. And the interesting thing about this is these concepts are not new. They're not. Resilient leadership, authentic leadership, strategic planning, resource allocation. These are not new concepts, but these are things that if you're going to be a leader, if you're going to lead organizations, you have to know the importance of self awareness, emotional intelligence, emotional regulation as you are building your leadership profile and your leadership brand. On top of that, learning how to plan and learning what strategery really is. Like a lot of people come up with an idea and they think, oh, I'm strategic. No, you just came up with an idea. That's called ideation. Being a strategist is seeing what's coming before it comes and having a plan for the backup plan for the backup plan for the backup plan. And so a lot of the work that I do with leaders is helping them see the forest through the trees and anticipate some of the problems that could be coming down the pike, especially when it comes to managing their organizations, leading their teams, um, and also recognizing these little power plays. When there's a new leader coming into an organization, people change. I think people realize they have to change because new leadership means new ideas that the staff may not have been exposed to. And you've got a leadership team that you've inherited as a CEO. And you have to walk in, not necessarily on eggshells, but you have to walk in just knowing that you can't make any rash decisions. As great as your strategy and your vision might be, you've got to take your time and figure out this leadership team because they could tank the organization, or if you can motivate them and convince them, you could have a really good train moving forward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I like that you said that a lot of these ideas are not new. That's what I think about in my work.
Mm-hmm.
It's stuff that has been around, but we need help, right? The forest through the trees. We need help. We need
Mm-hmm.
guidance to, all right, you've got all these ideas, but what do they mean for me now here? And everything is
Mm-hmm.
particular. And so it all
Mm-hmm.
needs to be laid out particularly for that person and their personality and their experiences
Mm-hmm.
and the place they're walking into.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like what you're doing of of helping leaders, CEOs, but then also interested in the employee experience. And I'm really
Hmm.
interested in the employee experience. And so, how do you see um, managing conflict, not managing conflict as a part of the leader's role in having this healthy work environment for all the employees?
Yeah, well, first, I think leaders have to recognize the importance of trusting themselves. And that goes to self-awareness, right?
Mhm.
When you don't trust yourself, you make all kinds of decisions that don't make sense. And you expect your teams to figure it out and move forward, push that vision forward and implement. And if you don't trust yourself enough, you create chaos. That chaos breeds an environment of conflict, hands down, right?
Mhm.
And if you have a leader or if you're in a leadership position and you are afraid to give feedback because of hurting someone's feelings, that is something you cannot escape. You can try to delegate it, you can hire an HR director. But if you are a leader and you are directly managing people and you are not giving feedback based on your experience, based on what you see, it's going to be difficult. It's
Mhm.
just going to be difficult. And it causes an issue with trust.
Mhm.
Again, breeding conflict. Because
Mhm.
if there's no trust, there's going to be conflict with you and your staff. There's going to be internal conflict that you don't even recognize. You cause internal conflict for the employees because they have to decide, do I want to stay, do I want to go, I need this job, this economy, what am I going to do? I feel stuck. And then you're on social media and you see people literally having to pray and cry before they leave, before they get out of the car to go into their jobs.
Mhm.
So I want leaders to not overthink what leadership is. Don't forget what it was like for you when you were a junior staffer and you had a supervisor. What were the kinds of things that you needed? What kind of support did you need from your boss? Be that person.
Mhm.
I'm afraid that a lot of people get these title changes, these salary increases, and these C-level jobs, and they forget, they get amnesia, they forget.
Yeah.
Their ego creeps in. I'm the boss now, I run the show. Okay, you can't run the show without people. You can't. You could, if you could do it on your own, then try it. Good luck.
Right.
Good luck.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this idea, which I completely understand and I appreciate that we don't want to hurt people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
but then we say, I don't want to hurt somebody. I don't want to hurt their feelings. Well, you really are hurting somebody when you don't tell them the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're hurting them
Mm-hmm.
and their ability to do good work and to advance. Then you're hurting the organization. You're
Yeah.
hurting everybody else on the team and in the organization because things aren't working and what needs to be said is not being said. And so
Mm-hmm.
this real
Mm-hmm.
rethinking about what harm is not dealing with conflict. I say early, often, swiftly, justly. That just part is consistently when they're your
Mm-hmm.
friend, when they're someone you've had issues with before, but this
Mm-hmm.
consistent rollout, which leads to the stability and trust, so that
Absolutely.
it makes it easier to hear the hard stuff. We all have areas to grow. I mean, what adult in an working environment should expect that they would never hear anything about improvement or anything that's hard to take? I mean, what a strange expectation.
Absolutely. And you think back to the situation I mentioned with the senator's office I worked for.
Hmm.
They were not thinking about my feelings. They were thinking about the feelings of the staff who were terrified of me. That was their empathy. They were thinking about the other staff. And I believe, the reason they had no problem giving me the feedback is because they knew I could take it.
Hmm.
They had observed me enough. And I remember the chief of staff said to me, he said, "You're tough as nails." And he had no problem telling me that I was a problem. Not at all. He's like, you're tough as nails. I'm sure you can handle it. You can handle anything. And thankfully I did. Thankfully, I had the right mindset that worked for the situation, and it worked out for me. But you're absolutely right. Harm is caused when you withhold information that could be helpful for someone's career and their own personal and professional development. I would be upset if if I became aware that you know, someone felt bad about something that I said and never said anything. You are called, like, you are restricting me from having the opportunity to correct the situation and have a dialogue with the individual, to not only apologize but to reframe and talk about, what was it that I said that could have been, that I could have phrased differently. I don't want to say the same thing to someone else.
Mhm.
I don't, it's an opportunity to course correct and
Mhm.
to learn more about other people, and how you can present your feelings and ideas differently, or at least in a more neutral way where it's not offensive.
Absolutely. And back to this bridge building, if I'm working with you and then something happens and I get offended or something else, but I clam up and you don't know anything is wrong, well, you're probably going to continue in that behavior because I haven't said anything. I don't think you don't think anything's wrong. I think there's something wrong. And now this gulf comes between us, which stymies innovation. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how much has not been accomplished in any organization in our country because people aren't collaborating, because they might be polite to each other, civil,
Right.
but they are not working together because they have an inability to say those things in a professional way, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a professional, you don't say, you're a terrible person and you made me cry,
Mm-hmm.
getting really helping people understand how to articulate at this meeting, this was said. And then I
Mm-hmm.
can say, Tina, is this what you meant? Instead of assuming this is what you meant. But
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and with resilience as well, right?
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
can you talk a little bit about resilience in 2025 and maybe the lack thereof and how to
Mm-hmm.
develop it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think resilience comes from lived experience. I think when you have had to fall, or you've experienced so many falls, and resilience is the number of times you're actually able to get up and bounce back. We all, hands down, go through all kinds of things. Some people need a little support in bouncing back. Others are so used to bouncing back that they even burn out, because
Hmm.
when you get up so many times and you keep going and you keep going, and you don't stop to take care of your mental well-being, you can burn out mentally just from the strength of resilience and continuing to go, and you're not taking care of yourself in the process. It's funny you asked this question. The first chapter in the Power Play Journal is resilience. And I had grappled with whether or not that should be the first chapter, because I talk about the death of my two brothers. I had two brothers that passed away during COVID, one after the other, just 2 weeks apart. But the second brother passed on the day of the first brother's funeral,
Mm. I'm so sorry.
which was it was compounding. It was a lot to deal with as you're walking in to the funeral of one to hear about the other.
Mm.
So I was I was grieving, but also in business mode, trying to figure out how to handle the next one, and the fear of there being another one and another one and another family member. Um, and I had a very important job at the time, and I had grappled with, okay, do I stay home and grieve my two brothers, or do I go back to work? If I go back to work, how do I go back to work? How do I show up at work? When you're in these senior political jobs, It's tough. It's a tough decision. It's a very adult decision to go back to work when you're not ready and just push through it. But I kept hearing my brothers say, don't sit around and cry about me, do your job.
Mm.
And I remember getting a call after my the second brother's funeral. It was a week later. I remember getting a call from a colleague asking how I was doing. Not necessarily when I would be ready to come back to work, but just how I was doing and some of the things that they were working on. And I was like, okay, well, I'll be in touch, in another week or so. And then I thought to myself, I want to do that stuff. I want to go. So I called and I was like, hey, maybe I could meet you guys. Where are you? um, and I just did it. I got on a plane and I just continued to work. But what I did in taking care of myself was I gave myself grace. I knew what I had been through,
Mhm.
and I knew that I was going to continue to go through it. And I decided, hey, I if I need time, I'm just going to take it. I'm not asking for permission. You know what I've been through. So if I need the time, I'm going to take the time.
Mhm.
That was the grace I extended to myself because only people that have experienced grief knows this. Grief comes out of nowhere. You could smell Aquanet hairspray and think of someone.
Yeah.
You could walk past a bakery and smell bread baking and think of your mom. I mean, grief just comes out of nowhere.
Mhm.
It's not scheduled. It just pops up. And you just have to be able to either handle it or give yourself the time and space to push through it, to experience the feeling and get through it. And if you need support, then you should seek that support.
That's such a great picture of
Yeah.
resilience. As you were thinking, so I taught philosophy forever, and I'm a virtue ethicist. And virtue ethics says that when you find, it's finding the medium. It's the middle ground between the two extremes. And so with resilience,
Hmm.
as you were talking, I was thinking, not being resilient is you're broken, right? So
Hmm.
you fall through and you're down. But then there's
Hmm.
the other, and that's a deficit. But then the other extreme is I'm fine. You dust yourself off. I'm fine, and that's a kind of denial. But
Yeah.
this beautiful picture of resilience and grace, and
Hmm.
back to this idea of self-knowledge, being able to put
Hmm.
those things together to not pretend that you're fine when you're not, but not
Hmm.
to um, to find it for yourself, right? That resilience. So
Hmm.
what getting up looks like is going to be different, but that resilience, if we think about that rubber band, right?
Hmm.
How we get back to this place, whatever, or the new
Hmm.
place, is this
Hmm.
lovely mixture.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
So Tina, can you tell us when you were first starting out in your career, how you thought about conflict and how you dealt with it versus how you deal with it now?
Hmm. Yeah, the way I dealt with conflict early on in my career was I got angry.
Hmm.
I didn't like being questioned. I didn't like having to explain myself. Um, I was angry a lot. I was also angry when I didn't understand something. And I didn't feel that in certain professional situations, I was not allowed to ask questions to get clarity. And so a lot of the conflict that I dealt with made me very angry. One, because I was very young. Two, I didn't know how to deal with the feelings of the conflict I was
Mhm.
experiencing and how to deal with the conflict. But because I was very self-aware, I knew, oh, this is making me angry. I just knew it was making me angry. And so the way that I would respond to conflict was to retreat, was to be angry and sit in silence and just, pierce my lips, or you could see it on my face that I'm so angry. And I just retreat and be quiet. As I got older, I became more comfortable sharing my feelings,
Mm.
but in a way that would communicate to others that when you say X, it makes me feel this way. That's very helpful in a marriage
Mhm.
to be able to say,
Yeah.
when you say these things, you may not be aware, but it makes me feel this way. I
Hmm.
don't like feeling this way. And I know it's not your intention to make me feel this way.
Hmm.
Can we talk through this? What were you thinking when you said that to me?
Yeah.
Now, in the workplace, it's a little different because you're calling out behavior directly. You are
Yes.
calling out behavior. So that can be difficult for the other person to receive. Um, this is why I wanted to study emotional intelligence
Mm.
because I realized there are a lot of people that are not aware of in the way that I wasn't aware when I was in the Senate starting out. I was so many people are not aware of how their words impact others
Hmm.
and how their behavior doesn't match their words or their behavior doesn't match the profile that they're trying to project.
Yeah.
There are too many gaps, and it causes confusion. Um, the other part is the way people can't figure out how to manage their emotions and control their emotions. When you're very upset, the last thing you should do is lash out. And I know we all get upset, but truly, the last thing you should do is lash out. If you're having bad feelings, if you're having negative feelings, it is okay to say, could we pick this conversation up later when I'm in a better place? I need to process this information. That's okay. If you can swing saying that phrase, that statement, you could save a relationship. A lot of this is really dependent on how much you care about the relationship with the other individual or the people that you're dealing with, you're talking to, your colleagues, your mom, your dad, your siblings, other family, friends. It's just, yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It really is tough, but it's one of the reasons why I wanted to study emotional intelligence.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting like how that just colors everything in all our interactions. And I would also
Mm-hmm.
add about the lashing out, and about how much we care, but also how much we care about ourselves. Because
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
lashing out, once it's done, we have this inability to trust ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I
Mm-hmm.
get triggered or if this thing happens, I'm not going to be able to trust that I'm going to act in concert with who I want to be or who I want to project. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you can't find it to care about the other person at the moment, you can,
Mm-hmm.
maybe work on caring about yourself and who you
Mm-hmm.
are and who you want to be in every circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Finding whatever anchor that might be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right, right. Absolutely.
So, Tina, this has been a wonderful conversation. My last question for you is, when
Mm-hmm.
you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, but that people will be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
Absolutely. I think leaders have to be more honest.
Mm.
Honest with the fact that maybe there's some things they're not good at, right? Some leaders are great visionaries, they're great strategists, but they're not good at the people piece. And if you know that right now, then figure out how to bring in a number two who understands operations, who cares about employees, who cares about making sure that the workforce is up to snuff and trained and has the resources they need to be successful to move your vision and your strategy forward.
Mm.
I think there are a lot of organizations functioning that are very flat, that it's the boss and everyone else. And I think it's fair for the boss to be frustrated when you're trying to go from vision to strategy and into details you're doing this every day.
Mhm.
That is too much. And then you add the people piece on top of that. You don't know what employees are going through before 9 a.m. and after 5 when they leave.
Mhm.
Life is happening to people simultaneously when they are working for you and walking into your organization. And it's just having sensitivity around that knowledge, just recognizing that you and your organization is not the only thing that staff has going on. Some people are, battling bad marriages. Some people are going through divorce. Some people are dealing with aging parents. Some people are having to grapple with, a spouse losing a job and now they are the breadwinner. There's so many things
Yeah.
that people are having to deal with. And if you are not in a place to provide an environment where employees could at least come to work and thrive and have good community and environment, there's nothing worse than having a bad home life and having to turn around and go to work and deal with the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
Absolutely.
so yeah, I think I want people to just be honest. If there's something you're not good at, then hire for the deficiency.
Hmm.
It's okay. It's okay to admit that maybe you did too much, you misjudged, now you need help.
Right.
It's okay.
I love that answer. It's such a human answer. I mean, and it's
Yeah.
unrealistic to think that because I'm the leader, I'm gonna kill it at everything. That
Mm-hmm.
is that's not true. We have our
Yeah.
strengths, we have our weaknesses. So what are we going to do if we think, well, I should be good at everything? Well, why do we think that, right? That's why we
Mm-hmm.
hire people who are smarter than us, hire people who are
Mm-hmm.
specialists in that, this, that, and the other. But you have
Mm-hmm.
got to know what you need that help in. I think that's just a fabulous answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Well, Tina, thank you so much for this conversation. And listeners, I encourage you to go get the book, The Power Play Journal, and you can find more about Tina online and through that book. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.
Take care.
Tina, thank you so much for that conversation. I love how you ended. When we think about great leadership, self-awareness is so important. But being aware of what you're great at, but what you lack, so that the people under you don't suffer. There are people to fill those holes. And that's why it takes a village, a community in any organization to be effective. So knowing what we lack, whether you're the leader or it's your first job, knowing what you're good at, knowing what your strengths are, and also knowing where things that are difficult for you so that you can build those bridges and find other people who that's their strength. Thank you, Tina. And I encourage you all to look at her book, The Power Play Journal. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And wherever you're listening or watching this, if you would like and subscribe, that's very helpful. My book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure, it's 80 tips of what not to do, and considers what to do instead to have a healthy work environment. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.